Chorvát Davidom Babichom sa ako 14-ročný vysťahoval z Dalmácie na Nový Zéland a v roku 1916 tam začal pestovať hrozno. Dnes pracuje v tejto vinárskej firme už niekoľko generácií pokope a vnuk David je jej generálnym riaditeľom. S vínom obchodujú už 10 ročia a svoje pôsobenie rozšírili do mnohých krajín sveta, no do starej dobrej Európy sa vždy rád vracia a nie len za obchodom.
For most of us, wine represents sort of a beverage which has its own.
Väčšina z nás považuje víno za nápoj s vlastnou dušou, s jedinečnou chuťou a svojou vlastnou históriou. Čo ale víno znamená pre vás?
Well, I think for me, wine represents first and foremost a way of life. My family have been winemakers for nearly 100 years. I'm the third generation, so wine to me is a really normal thing within my life. I grew up at the winery. My father's a winemaker, my grandfather. So it's really just a normal part of life that is present within your life in most things you do, especially when you work within the winery. When my grandfather left Croatia, he came to New Zealand to join his brothers who had immigrated before him. And when they first arrived there, they were digging a product called kauri gum. So that is the sap that comes out of the tree of the kauri. And it's in the ground, it's fossilized. And they were using this, it's like an amber. They're using that to make varnish. So it was a big export item, but you had to dig it out of the ground. And while my grandfather was doing that, he decided, well, he would plant grapevines. And so he planted grapevines, and then 3 years later, they are producing grapes, and he started making wine.
Prečo sa nakoniec rozhodli dať sa na vinárstvo?
He could see that there was a demand for wine, and not many people were making wine. And you can't be a kauri gum digger your whole life. That's like being a gold miner, and it's very hard work. It's you're often in swamplands, so you're wet, winter and summer, and you need to have an exit plan. And he could see there was demand for wine, so that's what he did. And he knew how to make wine. He's Croatian. So my grandfather initially was selling wine to other Croatians. Then to enlarge the sales, he needed to make that wine appealing to English, Irish, Scottish, who were the main settlers within New Zealand. And they found that they didn't want to drink dry table wine. They had to make it sweet and fortify it, and then you could sell it. And they weren't exposed to table wine at all. They would drink beer and whiskey. The first thing would be to secure those grapevines. So there was grape varieties in New Zealand that are available that people had bought in. Not a very wide choice, but he picked some mainly red wine varieties, maybe some Cabernet, some Merlot. I know he grew Pinot Meunier, which is used for champagne, to make a light red wine. He planted those because he's used to working in the land. He's a farmer. He's only 17 when he did this, so he's still a young guy, but he came from a farm in Croatia, so he understands this process of growing grapevines. And then when the grapes are there, you need a little bit of equipment, not too much, to make wine.
Koľkí na to vtedy boli?
In New Zealand, there was 5 of them. So the situation for my great-grandparents was that they were farmers in Croatia. And a small farm, it's poor, it's part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And there was a movement within Croatia from about 1880 to send your boys in particular to other countries, the New World. So go to America, go to Australia, go to New Zealand, maybe Chile, and just leave Croatia. And so my great-grandparents, they saved up some money and bought a ticket for the oldest boy, Yakov. He was 16 years old, and they put him on a boat to New Zealand. He didn't have any money because they're poor and didn't speak English.
To je dlhá cesta.
A long journey and no one's meeting him at the other end, and it's you go there and you figure it out, write us a letter, tell us you're okay. And that was a better choice to send a 16-year-old off than to stay at home and end up in the military. And then they saved up again, and 2 years later they could afford another ticket, and they sent the next boy, Marty. And then Ivan in 1908, and my grandfather was the last to leave. And so he was only 14 when he left, and never see his parents again, go and join his brothers, and just working with quite hard work. My grandfather said that the business really for the first 30 or 40 years was really desperate. They never had enough money, and the farm they put a deposit on the farm that we're still on in 1911 bought that, and he says really until about 1945 they couldn't pay anything off that mortgage, and it was desperate from year to year, can we hold on to this farm? And then my father joined in 1948, and that was a big help to my grandfather because now there's two of them working on the vineyard. And then my uncle joined, and slowly they started getting ahead. But in the early 80s, we had a situation where a German guy walked into the wine shop, tasted these wines that we were making, and said, "Oh, these are very good. Can I buy a container of these wines?" And that's 1,000 cases. And we're used to selling 50 cases as a good order. And my father said, "Look, if you want to buy that, that's fine. I'll give you an export price." And he made up some price. The guy gave him a cheque, and as payment, and Dad banked it, that cleared, and we're in the export business. And that was quite nice too, because my grandfather was 85 at the time, and he got to see this wine order leaving the winery to go back to Europe within his lifetime. And so I think that was a very special time for him to see, wow, I've really made it. We're now sending wine back to Europe, where I came from. Nowadays we're 90% export, and he got to see the very start of that. But products like this, Sauvignon Blanc, didn't exist back then in the early 80s, and that has been transformational for the New Zealand wine industry. So we would now be 80% export on that product to the world, and our international reputation is built around that product. And that really gained momentum through the late 80s and into the 1990s, and then 2000 onwards, the plantings grew quite rapidly and the size of the business grew. No, I'm the general manager of the business. My father is 82 now. He still works every day in the business. But my job is to make my father's job less stressful. So my father he looks after parts of the vineyards. There's a lot to care about in a winery. It's a complex business. You're grape growing, you're winemaking, you're trying to sell wine, you're administering an overall business. So there's a lot of facets to the business, and as general manager I look after every part of that. And I have my father but also my uncle, and three of us collectively manage that entire situation. So we get along very well. We talk about everything, and I enjoy having their experience. My father's been in our business for I think 66 years. I might travel 10 or 12 weeks a year. But generally I'll do 2 weeks at a time. Typically I'll go to the USA twice a year. I come to Europe twice a year. I might go to China or Asia once a year. I also go to Australia. Those are shorter trips, maybe for a week at a time. And travel around New Zealand as well. So I think that's an aspect of the modern wine industry, that your market is global and you have to go and see what's happening in those markets. What is the thoughts within the market about the wine, the style, the quality, the price? What are the competitors doing in the market? How is your relationship with your distributors and their customers? Is there any other products that they might be interested in? Product if you really want that. So just staying in touch with the market. You have to go and travel.
Naša spolupráca Provina a Babichom Winery je už vyše 7-ročná, keď si presne pamätám. A David vtedy prišiel prvýkrát do Bratislavy, lebo sa mu doneslo z uší jeho obchodného zástupcu, že je to jedna z najúspešnejších krajín, čo sa týka veľkosti trhu a predaja celého portfólia ich vín. A bolo to veľmi fajn pre neho taký zážitok, ktorý mal v Bratislave, že môj partner Mároš Plančák ho zobral do stredu Bratislavy a išli a teraz on hovorí, že no ale táto krajina, to nie je nič také, že prečo vy tu tak viete dobre predávať to víno, že kde sa to tak predáva? No ale poďme tu na, tak vybrali si 4 podniky a Mároš mu povedal, že nech si vypýta od tej angličtinou, nech si vypýta po anglicky nejaké biele zahraničné víno a vlastne zo 4 podnikov 3 mu na prvý šup ponúkli jeho Sauvignon Blanc Classic, takže bol z toho veľmi príjemne prekvapený. Z Nového Zélandu samozrejme je hlavná odroda, ktorá je svetovo známa, je Sauvignon Blanc, ktorá patrí určite medzi absolútnu svetovú špičku. Čiže tieto vína aj u nás tvoria ťažisko vlastne toho portfólia. Ale David a jeho vinárstvo, oni majú veľmi pekný Pinot Noir, čo je vždycky odroda, ktorá sa snúbi, povedzme, s týmito peknými bielými vínami. A potom keď sme boli na Novom Zélande, tak je tam pekná časť, sa volá Hawke's Bay, a tam potom robia také tie svoje ikonické vína, také, ktoré sú robené, bude to taký ten burgundský štýl, čo sa týka Chardonnay, alebo sú to vína takého štýlu založeného na odrodách z Bordeaux.
Do you use perhaps...
Používate pri pestovaní aj pesticídy alebo niečo podobné?
We can use that on some vineyards, and on other vineyards we run them organically. And the organics, I think, is something that is increasingly important for the future. And it's important to us to operate vineyards that way. No one drinks more of our wine than us. So we want the wine to be as pure as possible. And we're having a lot of success with the organic growing of grapes.
Máte mladú rodinu, povedzte mi niečo o nich.
Our oldest son, Peter, he's 8 years old, and he's very interested in the business too. I show him around the vineyards, he comes with me, show him through the winemaking process. So he's old enough to understand these parts, he knows what it does. And it's really pleasing for me that he's showing interest, even though he's only 8. But we also, my wife and I, have twins who are 4 years old, a boy and a girl, Luke and Annalisa. And they're a lot of fun as well.
Dovolíte im, aby sa hrali vo vinohrade?
In the vineyard?
Yeah, they will come out. They can't really play in the winery because there's machinery and moving around, and it's a little bit dangerous for an unsupervised child.
A priamo vo vinohrade?
Yeah, in the vineyards. Yeah, they will go for walks through the grapevines, and they really enjoy that. Well, I always like Europe. My family come from Croatia. I really like old Europe. My wife and I have a house in Croatia, and we're very close. My cousins live in Split, so we like to see them. But I can come to Croatia. It's our winter. It's summer in Europe. It's blue sky in Croatia. It's very good weather. The water is warm. It's clear. It's very beautiful. The scenery is dramatic, and it's old Europe. I can look around, there's something Roman is there, and something other building there is 800 years old. We don't have any of that in New Zealand, so, and it connects me with my history. I love Croatia.
Čo máte najradšej na Chorvátsku?
Well, Croatia's a very hard country. It's rock. There's not much soil. The people have to be quite tough to live in that environment. But when you stand back and look at Dalmatia, it's very dramatic. The rock goes straight up, then there's the sea.
Yeah.
The sea is blue, it's very clear and clean because it's so rocky, and it's warm. It's nice for swimming in. So you have these beautiful beaches. I just find that it's overall a really nice environment.
A čo Slovensko?
Come here every couple of years. I really enjoy coming here. I really enjoy an architecture here. It's really nice people, easy to get along with, enjoy wine, which is important. And I think it's interesting from my point as well that from 1989 onwards, so much has changed for the country, and it's changing, and it's every time I come here, you just see more and more change and more moving much more towards what I would consider normal, with the hospitality side of the business, restaurants, bars, nightlife. Travelling around the country or this part of Europe, that's been very well restored, and some of these buildings haven't been restored, but they are 900 years old, an old castle or something.
Nemali ste vojny, na čo by vám to bolo?
We don't need this stuff, yeah. There hasn't been enough time to build it, and so I like seeing that.
What is your favorite sport?
Aký je váš obľúbený šport?
I would watch rugby. New Zealand is very passionate about rugby, and we're the world champions at rugby. It is a national sport. Personally, I'm a kite surfer. So for my own involvement in sports, I go kite surfing. We have really good beaches for doing this, a lot of wind. Football is popular, so football, soccer is the same thing. And hockey is popular, and in summertime, cricket. I have several favourite areas, depends on what the situation is. There's some very good beaches in New Zealand. They're not very crowded, but have either good surf, warm water, a lot of natural beauty at these coastal areas. And then a completely different situation is in an area called Central Otago. The most well-known town is Queenstown. And that's like an alpine village for skiing or outside activities in summer, and it's beautiful.
A z toho vinárskeho pohľadu máte aké podmienky na pestovanie hrozna na Novom Zélande?
Well, there are 11 grape-growing regions in New Zealand, and if you look at the country is spread from north to south, over 1,000 kilometres, so there's quite a diversity. The northern part is subtropical, so you could grow warmer varieties like Cabernet. And when you go further down south, you start getting into cooler climate varieties like Sauvignon Blanc or Riesling and Pinot Noir. And then you go right down south, the most furthest growing region in the world, at 45 degrees latitude. And that's very good reputation for Pinot Noir. But I think the greatest advancements have really been in the understanding of viticulture for the climatic conditions. but also development of the canopy management. We're crop thinning a lot these days in pursuit of quality, so chopping some of the crop off when it's still green, so the flavour intensifies in the rest of the crop. Taking leaves off to get the sun on the grapes with certain varieties to ripen them more and advance that process. But it makes an enormous difference to the product. And I can't imagine us doing what we do now and not bothering to do any of that. So the understanding of viticulture, I think, has come forward a lot in the last 20 or 30 years.
Povedzte mi niečo o tomto víne.
Sauvignon is interesting because it is a very fruit-driven wine and it's very aromatic. So you smell a lot on this wine. But as winemakers, we can determine what those flavours are while it's still growing on the vine. In particular, you decide if you there's what we would call a harvest window, so you can harvest at any time from this point to this point. And if you harvest it early, then you end up with very grassy green characters like bell pepper or grapefruit, so very citrusy, grassy. If you leave it on the grapevine longer, maybe another 10 days or 2 weeks, those characteristics start moving much more towards tropical. So we would have passion fruit and melon and mango, what we call a tropical fruit salad. And you also get a drop in the acidity. So you can have two main styles of Sauvignon, and both are quite popular. And our family have always preferred that second style, where it is for our view, it's easier drinking, more approachable style. And we've had a lot of success with that. So we've done that style of later harvesting for maybe 25 years now. If I'm sitting outside in the sun, having a glass of wine, this is a perfect product. If we're having dinner, maybe I want a Chardonnay. And if I'm having, then on the main course, I'm having maybe some duck and I want Pinot Noir. So I think different wines are really applicable for different situations. I'm looking around the edges of the wine to see, is this wine vibrant, or maybe it's got some older characteristics, which would be a browner character. But if it's, you can see this has got a lot of greeny colour in it, and it's quite clear, it's not golden. If it was golden, it would tell me it's older wine, and maybe it's getting too old. We swirl the wine around like this. And that's ready to get some activity going on the surface, and it lifts the aromatics up. So if you smell it without doing that, you can smell something. But if you swirl it around, you get a lot more. So that's generally a normal thing. You can smell some of that passion fruit and tropical characters. And then now you have two choices. When you taste it, you can taste it and just swallow it. But if we were really assessing it, we swirl it around our mouth a bit because we want it to coat all of our mouth, and that's taste through aromatics through your mouth is that process. And then you swallow the wine and you can think about it, how much length does this wine have? Afterwards I've swallowed it, can I still taste it?
Ako som povedal na začiatku tohto rozhovoru, je naozaj radosť počúvať niekoho rozprávať o víne s takou vášňou a láskou ako vás. Ďakujem pekne za rozhovor. Tak teda, na zdravie.
All right, so
Živli.